Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. And today I have on John Fela. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. It's great to be with you.
I am really, really excited because I love having men on sharing their parenting journey. And I cyber stalked you, so I know a little bit about it. But I want you to jump in and share your parenting journey with us.
Absolutely. So, my journey is a little bit interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, when I reflect back on my own childhood, I always say that I learned more about what not to do from my own father than how to actually be a good dad. My own father was, for the most part, a functional alcoholic. He worked every day. And then he was drunk every night. And according to my mother, he's not an alcoholic because he goes to work every day. But I saw over the years all of the things that my father wasn't. He really didn't coach me up. He really didn't put his arm around me. He could show love, but it really wasn't what I ever wanted or experienced. Interestingly enough, and this is a deeper part of my story that I'll maybe save for later, but he actually wound up giving me some excellent fatherly advice and life advice that I didn't really understand until later on. But at any rate, when I became a parent to my own son, first of all, my son Chris is 17 with severe autism and nonverbal. When I say severe autism, I mean he will never be independent, never has been, and that's just not his. That's just not what's going to be his lot in life. But for me, it was a lot of, well, first of all, reflecting back on the way my own father raised me, I knew how involved and how intentional I wanted to be with raising my son. I wanted to be the dad that, could do everything, right? And certainly give his mom a break, but also to just have that bonding and connection time. And I will tell you that his disability in the beginning was something that, first of all, it wasn't really diagnosed until he was about 3, which is pretty common. We knew there were some issues prior to that, didn't really know how to work with them. We were first-time parents, even though both of our backgrounds were in education. So, we kind of did our best. And I will tell you that in terms of the relationship with my son, one of the things that I'm very grateful for is that I did get to spend a lot of time with him. I had the opportunity to spend time with him, and I really made the most of that. So, when his mom was, either doing, because his mom was a teacher, but also had a business on the side as well. So a lot of times we would spend weekends together and going to every park and playground and forest preserve and, play place, you name it. And as much as possible, I tried to give him just a normal childhood upbringing, which I think he very much had. And then, of course, as time went on, what I found is that my child's disability, like for most families of disability, put pressure on my life, on his mom's life, on our marriage. And really, it made me kind of come into question in terms of who I even was as a parent. Who was I in the marriage? Who was I in the family? What really was my value? Because what I really saw was my son's mom, who I'm divorced from, who was an excellent mom and still is. As is the case, most moms just kind of jump in. You've probably heard the line about the autism mama bear, and that's a very real thing, right? So for her, she just kind of jumped in and took over things naturally. And that was great. And she was very good at the organizing and the scheduling and the contacting the therapists and the insurance and all that. But then I had to figure out what I did, right? And unfortunately, for a lot of men in my situation, there's a default to, well, I'm just going to be the breadwinner. I'm just going to make the money. Well, we were both teachers. And oh, by the way, my ex-wife always made more money than me. So it was really a matter of finding what my value was, right? And that kind of led me on my journey into doing what I do now and have been doing for several years, which is disability advocacy, specifically with families and more specifically with dads, because I think, unfortunately, men in my situation are really under-resourced and overlooked. We want resources for moms, absolutely. We want resources for families and couples, but the dads have a kind of a unique journey, right? And so we want to make sure that we're addressing that and having those resources and options available to them, wherever they find themselves.
I also have a son who's autistic, who's 25. He's moderately autistic. We adopted him when he was 2, and you knew like there was so much neglect and Yeah, there was so much neglect that there were several things wrong. Scarlet fever, like he was sick, and not much information at all on autism or fetal alcohol effect or any of these things. So we were kind of like, yeah, we'll figure it out. We didn't get the diagnosis until he went to kindergarten, but he's verbal. Do you feel like if your son is nonverbal and my son's in an independent living program, so he has as much autonomy, will never drive, will never probably do a lot of things, going through college with kind of an IEP really slowly, which great, living in a place on his own, like in some ways more than we expected, and in other ways you're always hopeful that it will be more. I remember when after he got, was in the independent living and could start having better conversations advocating for himself. And he said, yeah, mom, I thought, I could drive. I'll be able to do that. And he's like, I absolutely cannot. Like and it wasn't. And I said, the interesting thing with autism for us, and I want you to tell me if it's the same for you, is that I wasn't solely making these decisions like this child will never drive and this is what he's able to do. I was asking for help from people who knew more about his diagnosis than I did. I had a feeling on some stuff like I don't think this is ever going to happen, but definitely dads, definitely. I mean, all of us are kind of like winging a prayer. Uh, Especially when there's a diagnosis. You had the diagnosis earlier, I'm guessing, because it was more severe and he was nonverbal, and you were both working, correct?
Yeah, so how it worked is, he was a preemie. He was 5 weeks
Okay.
early.
Yeah.
He was definitely what we just called a colicky baby.
Mhm.
He had a lot of sensory issue kind of a thing. And we did notice that developmentally there were some things that just weren't clicking, whether it was motor stuff or, again, definitely the speech. I love to tell this story, for example, when we went for his 18th month checkup, which is where at most times if there's a red flag, it'll appear. And I remember that his pediatrician asked us the battery of questions and then got to, well, is he speaking? And we said, well, not really. He's not really doing the babbling or the enunciating or anything. He's just like there really is no, vocal play at all. And she said, well, there might be a problem. So here's what you do. You go across the street to the professional building and you have him see the speech therapist. And
Mm.
her literal words were, I don't know what they do, but they play with the kids and they make them talk. So just go there and you'll be fine. And we're like, oh, okay. So we
Okay.
did that. And she played with him and he didn't talk.
All
And
right.
then we said, well, let's maybe test the hearing. Hearing seemed fine as far as they could, tell. And then we went through because I live in the Chicago area. So in Illinois, we have something called early intervention where you can get services through the state.
Yes, we did.
And
Yep.
yeah, so we were able to get some professionals, and now of course they can't diagnose anything, but they said, well, yeah, based on our observations, there's some stuff. And then it was really right before his third birthday that we took him to a neuropsych, and then he got his formal diagnosis, which at the time was pervasive developmental disorder. PDD. So it wasn't autism. It was autism-like or autism-like because he had some of the markers for traditional autism, not all. So the neuropsych felt that was more appropriate. That doesn't even exist anymore. It's kind of like Asperger's.
Okay.
It's kind of gone away now. It's all just autism. So, he and the nonverbal piece has been especially challenging because especially in areas where we've had medical crises. So for the most part, he has been a healthy kid. However, for example, and this happened back in 2019, so I want to say he was probably 11-ish at the time, he developed 3 grand mal seizures in one day. Just totally out of the blue. He literally was coming home. It was a Saturday. Mom was bringing him home. She called me from the car. Hey, he threw up in the car. I'm thinking, okay, he had too much to eat for lunch or something. He gets out of the car and it was like he had a stroke. He had no motor function at all. The eyes were rolling in the back of the head. We're like, what the heck is this? Call the ambulance. He had a seizure in the car on the way home and then 2 more on the way to the hospital. Get to the hospital, they do a scan and they say, well, he's got a Chiari. Okay, which we had never heard before, Chiari. And we're thinking, okay, is that like a brain tumor or what? And apparently, no, it's a brain malformation, meaning his head and his skull were not growing symmetrically. So it was putting pressure, which resulted in seizures. Now, here's the thing. He has Touch Chat, which is a communication app on his iPad.
Okay.
He can use it it really is one of those things where it depends on who he's working with and the therapist and the structure. Because a lot of times he'll just push a button like, leave me alone, get out of here. But he had been pressing up until that point, like head hurt, head hurt. And we're like, okay, are you sick? Do you have a fever? Like, we'll give you a Tylenol. Like we didn't know. And apparently it was maybe the onset of these seizures. And then once they just manifested, then it was easy for us to know. But again, without that verbal communication piece, if he had that, he could at least tell us, my head is really hurting, or my head's really hurting here, or you gave me some medicine and it's still hurting. Okay, well, then at least we know maybe to take you to the doctor and maybe we get a scan before the seizures. But that's just one example. And I have others again of how challenging that can be when you don't have that, and therefore you're so dependent on body language, cueing, basic sign, whatever you got, we kind of have a mishmash of several things, but a lot of it is just knowing your kid. Now, the one thing I will just finish this point with is this is also why it is so hard to leave a child like ours in any residential care. Now,
Yeah.
currently, my son is at a residential facility in Wichita, Kansas. He's finishing up high school. He's not going to be there the rest of his life. It'll be another year, maybe two. But the issue is that we have to be able to trust people now, which we do. It's been a good experience, but also wherever he winds up permanently or down the road.
Yeah.
Because you've got to trust people because it's not like he can come back and say, so and so was mean to me or so and so did this to me, right? We have no clue. So that's where that amount of trust it's needed, but it's so challenging and it's scary.
Nonverbal is absolutely hands down the most challenging. I would say even with a verbal child who's has moderate autism and fetal FAE markers, he can't communicate in a way that other people always get it. Like the communication, it's not like he was mean to me and explaining it and is this a bullying situation. The information doesn't transfer well. I want to go back. The trust thing, I definitely want to touch on that again. And the independent living thing, which was a really big deal for us. And I know because I was like, I don't want to have a 40-year-old autism child that I'm caretaking. What's going to happen if something happens to me? I'm also divorced. Like, it's sometimes the kindest, best thing you can do to figure that piece out long term for autonomy and stuff, instead of like, why didn't you just take care of him yourself forever? Because that's not realistic. But I want to go back first and talk about labor and delivery. He was a preemie. Were there any signs during pregnancy? Because generally there are not. Can you go back and take me through that labor delivery and like what happened between that, the pregnancy and the diagnosis? Because the nonverbal stuff and the issues that you have can be massive and so hard. Like I can't imagine seizures and not even realizing it. I
Right.
That's terrifying.
So what I'll tell you is now I will say that we have some new information that is pretty recent. So we actually have more answers now, and I'll get to that in a second. But to your question, during the pregnancy, I would say that there really didn't appear to be any trauma during the pregnancy, other than my wife having a couple of colds here or there. I know she actually had a little bit of a cold when she was going in for delivery. We had actually originally scheduled a water birth with actually a midwife, with an obstetrician who was a trained as a midwife. So we're going to do a water birth, tub birth kind of a thing. Get to the hospital. She's got a cold. They take her into triage. They're like, ain't happening. So they give her the IV with the antibiotics just to make sure everything's fine, whatever. I will tell you, it was like a 48-hour labor. It was very long, very intense. We had the whole, Pitocin epidural thing, all of that. And, when he finally came, he came and everything seemed okay on the surface. He was in the NICU for about a week. But we were able, and he was small. He was 4 pounds 2 ounces when he was born. He was like 315 when we actually brought him home. So he was not the smallest, but he was small. So we didn't know. Now again, I just want to mention this because obviously there are a lot of folks and a lot of parents and a lot of well-meaning folks who will make suggestions. Was it this? Was it the vaccines? Was it
Right.
something I took? Was it Tylenol? Whatever. And without going down a rabbit hole, what I say is this: I never judge a parent for questioning anything because I understand what that's about. We questioned everything. Absolutely. I'm not here to say that vaccines cause autism or Tylenol causes autism or anything. I think that there are a variety of factors. And in our son's case, oh, by the way, which we didn't know until recently since we've done genetic testing, that he
Okay.
actually has a chromosomal deletion. He has something called Phelan-McDermott syndrome. So he has a chromosomal deletion that apparently happened in utero. It is not genetic. So he was just, in there and one day poof. And apparently that had nothing to do with anything we did or did not do. So, on the one hand, you kind of breathe a sigh of relief. On the other hand, it's kind of like, okay, well, we couldn't have done anything different, but there's really not much we can do either, other than kind of keep doing what we've been doing, which is support him as best we can. And it's not to say that, none of the therapies or anything weren't a help or helpful, but there's a certain place of surrender I think you also need to get to. And unfortunately for parents who maybe don't have that answer or don't have that answer yet, again, you're going to question everything. And that's understandable. I never fault a parent for doing that. And to be fair, we have probably looked at now the one criticism I will have is I think families like us and parents like us are also very we are open to being taken advantage of in a lot of respects because you have so many. I'm not going to say they're all snake oil salesmen, but if
Right.
you go to these autism conferences and things, and you go to the information area and the vendors, and everybody's got a cure, and you got to take this supplement and try this diet and do this therapy. And here's what I say: it might work for one kid, it might, and that's great, but there's no magic bullet. It ain't going to work for everybody. And we are so vulnerable as families because, again, we want an answer. We want to cure our kid. But guess what? You want to try a million things. Do you have the time and energy to do that? Do you have the money and resources to do that?
Right.
In our case, we had the ability to do some of it, not
Right.
all of it, and even if you can do all of it, again, at what point do you just kind of say, you know what? This is just my child, and I'm going to love him, regardless, no matter what.
I think also the amount of time that you get sucked into trying to figure out a situation that most likely like this is what it is kind of thing. You want to do the best job in the situation without making yourself nuts and getting sucked into so much time trying to make it better that I feel like when in the moments of time that I was like that I was like, there's got to be something, a different way, something better. Because I wanted the best for my son, were the times that I was probably the least present. And that's like, is that worth it? Although you're right, some things work. Like we recognized sugar was like cocaine. It was such a massive trigger to my son that made me question, okay, what can I do to make our diet better so that it supports him the most without triggering symptoms, and then maybe not using medication, which I never did until he was an adult and started to kind of make those decisions on his own. And I'm grateful that I did that. But really, you're right. The bottom line is I know people are trying to be helpful and supportive, but in the end, you just kind of want to be a dad to your son, right? Like in the best way possible. So you are navigating after birth, you had like a preemie, you had so many things going on. And I'm glad you said, like, we have more information now because your son's 17, mine's 25. A lot of stuff has happened. They don't diagnose the same way. They don't do a lot of things the same way. So all this stuff to make you crazy has changed, and I'm guessing will continue to change as we know things. You had you had to wrestle with all of these options, and then the diagnosis came. When you got the diagnosis, was it, because I know how I felt when you finally get the bottom line, like this is the diagnosis of autism, nonverbal, never going to be independent. Was it a relief? Like, did you feel like you could move forward and do more with that afterwards?
I think it was a help,
Help.
but it was also a little still a bit of a mixed bag because, for
Yeah.
example, with that label, the neuropsych said, here, I recommend these things. I recommend ABA therapy. I recommend, OT. I recommend cranial sacral, therapy. And like,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
and again, we have tried it all, right? But what's interesting is even beyond that diagnosis. My son had a really, really great speech therapist that we
Oh,
actually found right about the same time. And she always, always told us, he's not really autistic. He's got apraxia. he's got speech apraxia, he's got motor apraxia, meaning that, his brain just never fully developed the ability to have speech. And she actually said if he could talk, he'd probably be a much different kid. Now, again, he
Yeah.
did have a lot of stimming, he had a lot of sensory seeking, he still does. It's less now that he's older. When he was little, it was like Tasmanian devil stuff.
Right.
But that's where too, like having the label, does the label help? It does. But at the same time, it's almost like you kind of take that pause, you take that breath. Okay. And now let's look at this big laundry list of things that we're going to do or try or experiment with and see, what will work. And then of course, what you open yourself up to is like with any medical condition or diagnosis, you try to find community. And this is a big
Yes.
part of my message as well. You try to find people like you. What are you guys doing? What have you guys tried? And of course, when you open yourself up to other families, parents, that's a good thing. However, you are also going to get, just like I described, going to one of these conferences, you're going to get a million solutions to your problem. Why haven't you tried this? Well, you really should be trying that. And unfortunately, too, I will say, we have run across parents who, mom specifically, in terms of having conversations with my son's mom, where sometimes it even gets judgmental. Well, how could you not be trying this? Well, why aren't you? Well,
Yeah.
what's wrong? And it's like, well, hang on, because we're not doing it. You can do it. That's great. We're making a different choice for whatever reason, right? So it's kind of that pause or breath. It's kind of that piece in the eye of the hurricane, right? It's like, okay, we got an answer. That's cool. Let's sit with it for a minute. Now let's think about everything else we have to do, right? And
Yeah.
that really kind of, I think that's a little microcosm of what it's like to be a parent of disability, right? That really is just a little
Yeah.
picture into our world.
For me, all it did was it gave us a way to move forward with resources and like disability for social security and getting him into independent living. Like it just basically, I was like, I don't care what the diagnosis is. You can diagnose him with insert whatever thing here that's appropriate. I don't care what you say he has. I care. Are we doing are we moving forward in the way that makes the most sense? And it did give a little clarity on that. Like, okay, now this is what's going on. These are the programs he can access now because we have that diagnosis. Didn't do anything in my day-to-day living, like nothing, or decisions made, nothing. There was no relief in it in that way. It was literally more like, okay, now we know what to say on the disability form for Social Security and the independent living program. You said you were both educators, and how soon or how early in his life did you switch gears in education? Because you're right, one of the things you look for is community. And part of that, I remember reading a blog article from a mom and being like, I am so glad she was willing to be assertively open in how she felt and how it affected her and her marriage, because those were things that just weren't talked about. And I think there's some shame in wanting to share, like, this is hard and sometimes I don't like it, and this is how it's negatively affecting my relationship and siblings and all of the things. And this woman did it, and I was like, bless you for being brave enough to share it, because I imagine the backlash and criticism was awful. But part of that is like, we just want to talk to somebody who gets you, where you don't feel that guilt, shame, fear of sharing how hard it is. When did you switch gears? When did you look for community? When did you become community?
Yeah, so that very much is a big part of my story. So I tell in my presentations, I speak about something I call the tale of two parking lots, okay?
Okay.
Because it's a story that involves two parking lots. So the first part of the story happened right around it was summer of 2012. Now my son was a few years old. We already had the diagnosis, but this was probably the worst season of my life and our collective life as a family. We got divorced eventually in 2019, but we were at the point years prior to that where our marriage was hanging on by a thread. I had a job loss. We were struggling financially. We didn't know where we were going to put our son because we had tried some more traditional preschool programs. That obviously wasn't a fit. So, okay, do we need to move somewhere for a better school district? Like what? Like all of these things were just happening at once. So we attended a church at the time, and they used to have a men's group that
Mm.
would meet on Friday nights. And so I was going to this thing, and I was early. I was sitting in the car. I'm like, okay, I got some time. I'm going to make a couple of phone phone calls. I called my best friend from high school and my roommate from college. They were both married. They didn't have kids yet, but I was close to them. And I'm like, I got to talk to somebody. And I laid it all out and they kind of knew a little bit, but they didn't know everything. And, when they heard it, they're kind of like, man, we love you, but we don't know what to do for you. We can't even wrap our heads around this. In fact, my one friend said, if it were me, I would walk away. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing that. And then I wind up going into this meeting. Now the guys that were in this group were, for the most part, I was in my late 30s at the time. So these guys were at least 20, 30 years older than me. So I'm
Mm.
thinking I'm going to get some sage wisdom, life advice, guys, huddling around you. And, you kind of do your thing in the beginning when you kind of share around the circle. And I basically shared with them exactly what I just shared with my two friends in the car. And there was just like this stunned silence. And then after maybe like 30 seconds, a minute of just like silence, the group leader chimes in. He's like, wow, that's really tough. We're sorry to hear that. But what you need to know is that it's going to be okay. Now, here's the thing. One thing I've learned in life is I believe, especially as a person of faith, yes, it's all going to be okay. But I'm in the middle of crisis. When you're in the middle of crisis, that's not what I want to hear. What I want to hear is, I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? Can I talk to you? Do you want to go out and have a conversation? Can I take you out for coffee or a beer? Whatever. Can I be a community? And that's when I learned I had no community. I had family, I had friends, but none of them understood me. So
Yeah.
understanding that I didn't have community then set me on a path to find and build community. Now, in the beginning, a lot of it was just trying to find community. And what I always give people advice of, especially on this journey, is, like me, I started out small. A lot of it was just trying things like developing relationships with the families and, that my son went to school with in his special ed room and that kind of thing, and then families in our neighborhood and church and all that kind of stuff. But then that also blossomed into other things. Like I did start like a support group for special needs dads that met in my community. I had tried a previous version of it that didn't work. I tried it again. It stuck. I've been doing it for several years. I'm still actually doing that same one, although now it's kind of merged with another group, so it's even bigger. And then I'm doing another one as well. So things like that are really kind of practical grassroots, just saying like, hey, you know what? This is available to you in the community. We meet here every month. We have a downstairs room, like a party space that they close off, and we can have privacy and talk. And I get guest speakers and all that kind of stuff. But then for me, the community blossomed even further because then I got involved with bigger organizations locally in the Chicago area, but also around the country, and doing things like writing and speaking and podcasts and all that stuff. Now, on the one hand, you might say, okay, well, how is that tied to community? Well, the reality is that it helped me develop relationships with people who provided me with resources, certainly for my own family and for my own son, but also for others, right? So, now, when I talk to people and they're like, what do you need? And I'm like, well, listen, you may be in another part of the country. I'm still happy to connect with you, but you know what? I may know somebody by you, or I may know an organization that has, some reach or tentacles out by you, or, whatever it is you need, I can provide you with at least a resource. So the great thing about community is, it starts out with, okay, I've got nobody. Let me at least find people close to me. And then let's see, how much further I can take it. And again, it's not that everybody needs to be called to be an advocate or an ambassador or everything, but you know what? Lean into what's comfortable for you, but also your giftings and your interests. Because I think you'll find that even with a lot of these families, hey, it's like anything. You may find a parent or a family that, we really enjoy doing some of the same stuff. We enjoy going fishing or hiking or, whatever your thing is, right? Hey, well, great. Then you've just developed a friendship. And you know what? That has also been the fruit of a lot of this community stuff are the intentional, real friendships that I have developed with families, especially dads. Guys I never would have met otherwise. I never would have crossed paths with these folks, but they became real, true friends. And even beyond our kids' disability, that really is the gifting there. So community takes time, it takes layers. But the second part to that parking lot story, because there are two parts, happened in 2019. It was Black Friday. It was the day after Thanksgiving. You can't make that up. And I had literally just gotten handed out of the blue, totally not expecting it, with divorce papers from my then wife. We weren't fighting. There were no problems. It was just, I don't love you anymore. Here you go. Okay. What do I do now? Kind of a thing. Well, she left to, go, like, I think she went to her mom's house and my son was with a family friend. And I think she had kind of she kind of orchestrated it that way, and she actually said, "I'm going to give you your space. I'm going to give you, some time by yourself." And I'm like, I can't stay in this house. I'm going to go crazy. So what do? I go in the car, take a drive. Don't know where I'm going to drive to. I drove to the parking lot of the nearest kind of big box retail area, and I get on my phone again. The difference between that experience and the experience in 2012 was now I had people to call. I had friends who were also special needs parents, many divorced. In fact, the first guy I called was a special needs attorney who also was a special needs dad who was also divorced. So I'm like, hey, there you go, trifecta. So I'm like, great. So, but people who were living my experience, other dads, other parents, people who worked in disability, pastors, you name it, like anybody who could be a support, was there. And that was the difference. It wasn't about, wow, look how cool I am. I made all these friends. It's I need these people. I'm grateful, and it's so incredible that I have these folks available to me. Now that I'm in real crisis again, I do have those folks to turn to, and they do have advice to give me, and they do have support to give.
Oh, I think it's huge. I mean, it's massive having that community, just somebody who gets you, that you can feel unfiltered with. That's massive. I love that. That's great. And you built that community. Um, how I want to go back now because I know he's 17 now and he's finishing high school. And I was always so excited for any marker that was like normal for my kids. He has the iPad, so he's able to have a better way of communicating. And I'm sure that's gotten tremendously better over 17 years. Like his ability to communicate with it, probably, but also just like the iPad itself and the apps and the technology. Let's wrap up with talking about how do you let go and allow that trust? Because for you to, I mean, you got divorced. We're talking 6 years now. You got divorced. He was about 11. At some point, you're doing joint custody. And at some point, you have to trust an independent living place program that you guys were like, yes, this is the one. I think it will go well, and let go in some of those ways. And holy cow, that's hard. So share with me that part of the journey.
So that is something that I can tell you we're very much wrestling with now. So I am divorced from his mom. I'm actually remarried as of last year. So now we have a stepmom in the picture. My ex is engaged. It's a long engagement, but she's engaged. But the fact is that there are other voices in the room essentially, and so what we're talking about now is okay. What do we all want? Now, at the end of the day, his mom and I are probably the key decision makers. But I know when we started out these conversations years ago, and this is the other thing that I always encourage families to do, it is never, ever too soon to start long-term planning. We started it, and this is where I was grateful for my ex and for her family, especially because they had that kind of vision and mindset in mind. So, like for example, we started looking at this really when he was 5, doing like a special needs trust and all of these things. So, we always had the idea that we could turn the house he grew up in the Chicago suburb he grew up in, turn that house into what's called a SILA, which a lot of folks are probably familiar with. It's an acronym. Basically, it's a group home managed by a third party organization, but it's a residential home in a neighborhood, and you could have up to, let's say, 3, 4, 5 folks living in there with staff from this partner organization. That was always the goal. But again, right now what we're looking at is, well, he's at a residential facility right now out of state. Now, the reason why he's there is because he was doing well in the district he grew up in this particular town. He had been there since kindergarten. Sophomore year of high school a couple of years ago, everything just kind of collapsed. Some of it was adolescence, which is always really hard for our kids to deal with all of the hormonal changes. Some of it was we had to adjust some meds. Some of it we think actually was the school environment, but however that cocktail got put together, he was showing aggression. He was getting he was showing frustration. He couldn't operate in the environment. So we tried to find something close to home, and eventually we wound up looking at this thing out of state for us. So again, it is a fair distance from where we live, and we do have to fly to go visit him and that kind of thing. But the fact is that he is getting really good care. It is a place that other folks had told us about. It came very highly recommended, and so we trusted it, and that's great. So on the one hand, I will say that we're already having a little bit of that experience of having to have that separation, not just in terms of him living in a place that's not our actual home, but someplace very far away, quite honestly, and doing a Zoom call a couple of times a week, maybe, and seeing him every other month. So, the fact is that we're kind of getting a crash course on that. But then, of course, what that means is he's not staying there forever. He can only stay there until 21 anyway. So eventually, when he comes home, whenever that is, what is that long-term thing? Is it going to be that we can turn that house he grew up in into a Scylla with a partner organization? That's one thing we've explored. We have explored him being in a Scylla in a different home, let's say in the area. It's an interesting conversation right now because where I live in the Chicago area and where his mom lives, we're about 45 minutes to an hour apart from each other. So there's a place that I really like that is very close that, I'm hoping will at least going to seriously consider. And there are a couple places up by her that, we think we could seriously consider as well. Where he winds up, though, here's the thing. One, you can get your child on a list. That doesn't mean that that's where they're going to wind up, right? And we have heard it multiple times. You get your child on a list, their name comes up, we review the file. Might be yes, might be no. Okay, then what, right? So there's always the issue that you can have a list, and I encourage families also to get a list. Don't just say we absolutely know they're going to wind up there. Have a backup plan and another, right? But here's the other thing, and this really is where the rubber meets the road for me. It is with the care from those DSPs, from those, from the actual care staff, the one-on-ones, because unfortunately, what you see in a lot of these places, and I think you see it around the country, is the high turnover rate, right?
Yep, yep,
Retaining good staff is a challenge.
yep.
Why? And I think especially since COVID as well, because this is very hard work. I get it. It's very hard work. You don't make a lot of money. You could probably make as much money or more working in some retail place or food service or something and maybe get better benefits too. So what I always look for is, okay, let's look at the quality of the staff. And like, for example, the one place that's by me that I really like, I know the CEO personally. He's taken me for a tour and he has literally told me, we differ in that we don't have the same volume of staff, but we do build into our staff and we let them know we care about them. We make sure they're taken care of and that they're happy, because we understand what this is. And in his case, he actually worked up through the system. He's been there, done that. He's been in the trenches, so he understands what it is. So I think that's the thing you want to look for there too. But again, at the end of the day, whether your child is 1,000 miles away or down the street, that is probably one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing you'll do as a parent, is to trust them. And oh, by the way, at some point when you, dad, mom, whoever are all gone, and this is my biggest fear, um, how much do you trust them to take care of your child for however much longer your child will be around? If they're going to live another 20, 30, 40 years. And of course, with advances in medical science and everything, you hope that's a long time. However, the fact is that, can you actually go to sleep at night thinking your child's going to be alive for another 30 years without you? And then how much do you trust wherever your child is? That is the biggest fear that keeps me up at night. And I think it's the same for most families too.
It is with any a child with disabilities the most. Um, yeah, you're right. And I think you take it like one decision in one day and one situation at a time, and definitely don't put all your eggs in one basket, and know that in the end, like, I've done the best job that I can. I don't look back and think, oh, I should have done it this way. Like, literally, I think when you have a child with disabilities and you're so hyper aware of every decision that you're making, you do the best job you can. But yeah, that is hard. John, wow. Oh, wait, we're going to end. You're part of you have two books. And I want to shout that out because they're not out yet, but I want people who are listening to know that they're coming and look for them. Tell us about both of those books.
Yeah, so the first book is actually my memoir. So it's my experience of being a special needs parent. So a lot of what I just shared, but a whole lot more, is in that book. It's called Faith Like My Father, and it really, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the interview, my father kind of being this functional alcoholic who really didn't do much for me, except he gave me the best life advice in the world, and I didn't realize it until later on. So I won't spoil that. You got to get the book, but the whole story kind of unwraps that experience. And then, of course, again, I go into a lot of detail about my son's birth, marriage, divorce, single parenting, remarriage, the whole spiel. So that's coming out probably the end of this year or beginning of next year. If anybody follows me on social media or website, it'll all be out there so you can easily find that. It'll be available on all, retail sites, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all that. And then there's another book, and I don't remember the exact title of it, but if you follow me, you'll be able to find it. It is not my book, but I'm contributing to a book a friend is doing with Temple Grandin. And that book is actually going to be written for educators and therapists to provide a first-person perspective on either being a parent of someone with a disability or being a person with a disability yourself.
Oh,
And so
awesome.
I wrote a chapter from the perspective, again, of being a parent and also former educator. So I think that's going to be a wonderful resource for a lot of folks, including families, especially families. So definitely look for that. Again, both of those you'll be able to find, if you connect with me on social media or the website.
John, thank you so much for sharing your story. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. It was great. Thanks so much for having me.